Greetings, my name is David Oinby. I'm a professor of Chinese history at the University of Montreal in Montreal, Canada. And today I'm delighted to be in Halle, Germany, interviewing Xiang Biao, who's the director of the Max Planck Institute of Social Anthropology. I'm doing this because Xiang Biao has written a lovely, delightful book called Self as Method, which I have translated as a part of a project that I will explain before getting to Biao's book. For the past few years, my research has been devoted to reading, translating, and curating the work of Chinese establishment intellectuals, by which I mean intellectuals who publish in China and thus who respect, at least formally, the rules of the game as set by the party and the party state. This doesn't mean they're propagandists. In fact, almost none of them are propagandists. They are independent intellectuals who are writing to influence one another, to influence public opinion, perhaps to influence the state. I happened onto this a few years ago in curious ways, and it was a discovery for me, and I think for a lot of people. The state of media treatment of China in the Western world at present emphasizes dissidence. If we know any Chinese intellectuals at all, we know Ai Weiwei, we know Liu Xiaobo, but we don't know anyone else. And while these dissidents are very important, and I support them in my intellectual life, it's important to know that this is not the only Chinese intellectual that exists in China. There are hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people who are wide awake, writing interesting things. They perhaps can't say everything they want to say, but they can say a lot. So I got intrigued by that, and for the last few years, I've been running a blog that's called Reading the China Dream, just readingthechinadream.com, where I translate and curate and put these people in context so that we can get a broader sense of what thinking China is thinking. It's important because we don't know. We simply don't know. I'm an American, although I live in Canada. The rivalry between America and China is extremely important. And it's important to note, I think, that when America surpassed Britain to become the major power over the course of the 20th century, they knew what one another were saying because they spoke and read the same language. Now we don't know. We simply don't know. We assume that all of China speaks like the wolf warrior propagandists. We assume that all of China thinks like Xi Jinping would like them to think. You don't have to be a dissident not to not share all of Xi Jinping's ideas. And if you spend some time with my texts, you will see that there's a wide array of public opinion, and it's quite fun to read. In any event, a few months ago, I was looking for texts to work on, and I was reading an article by a well-known Chinese anthropologist called Wang Mingming, whom I know from many years ago. And in his introduction, I remember he was talking about a well-known book called Asia as Method by, I think it's a Taiwanese anthropologist called Chen Guanxing. And it's a very influential book. It proposes that we take Asia as method as a part of deconstructing imperialism and Western hegemony. And it's had the impact that it's had. It's very important. But Wang Mingming, who's a very funny kind of guy, said, well, I like Chen Guanxing's book pretty well, but it's nowhere as interesting as Xiang Biao's book, Self as Method. They share that same title, that same form of the title. So I thought, what is this? And I already knew Xiang Biao. I had translated a text that he'd written about concentrated mobility, where he talked about looking at how Chinese society had changed between SARS and COVID, due to complex factors that we don't have to get into here. So I ordered the book on Amazon. Luckily, Amazon got the book to me. And I started reading it, and I thought, this is really good. It would be nice if I could translate this. So I got in touch with Biao. I think we'd exchanged 1 or 2 emails before. And he thought it was a good idea. So I did it. The book is translated. It'll come out on Palgrave in the next few months. And I'm here at Biao's gracious introduction because the book, which is delightful. It's a mixture of personal journey, how-to advice for Chinese young people, and sort of manifesto for intellectual activism, which I've never quite seen a similar book. And what's remarkable about it, there are lots of remarkable books in the world that never get anywhere. You know, somebody publishes them, maybe somebody reviews them, but the author sort of talks about it for the rest of his or her life as, I missed my chance. In Biao's case, he and Wu Qi, who came up with the book, a Chinese journalist, it worked. The book has so far sold like 160,000 copies in China, and was mentioned or named one of the most outstanding books by Douban, which is sort of a publishing platform. So, and it generated a lot of reader response, a lot of discussion. It's what every author dreams of. So I thought this would be a fantastic project to work on. At the same time, Biao and Wu wrote it, or it's actually a set of interviews, addressed to a Chinese audience. And while we're all citizens of the world, we all speak our own language and have our own concerns. So many of the themes that are raised in the book are not familiar to an English-speaking audience. So we thought the best way to cross that bridge or to solve that minor problem was to have a conversation. So that's what we're doing here today. And thank you so much for having me here. And I have greatly appreciated the intellectual collaboration that has produced this translation. So let's jump right into this series of questions. Let's start with your research. I mean, you're in your field and even out of your field. You're a very well-known author. You've written prize-winning books, but we hope that people who read this translation will be people who go beyond the field of social anthropology. So from what I've read, you have a couple of big name books, one based on Zhejiang Village, which was a migrant community from Zhejiang who went to Beijing at the very early period of reform and opening to sort of test the possibility of working within the evolving market economy. And in English, this is called Transcending Boundaries, I think. And then there's a second book called Global Body Shopping, which is a fascinating study of the IT world, migrant labor from India to Australia, and how these forces of globalization impact family decisions, individual decisions, life trajectories, life choices. And since then, you moved on to a vast number of other subjects, including your concerns about the platform economy and the social economy now. So I wonder how you might describe the threads that run through those various projects, and we'll eventually try to link them up to the present book.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot, David, for coming all the way from Canada. I mean, that is really a great honor, to have this kind of opportunity to reflect on what I have done. And this is also particularly important now because at the moment, I'm thinking to set up the new department in the Institute. So it is a moment to think what the future direction should be and what kind of research matters at this moment of time. What really interests me is always the question that how small actions build up big patterns, or ordinary people's everyday activities can build up things like globalization or transnational trade. So this probably somehow differs me from a mainstream anthropological thinking after 1980s, because people think that the business of anthropology is to represent the people whose voice is not heard, the marginalized. So to represent them and to make their voice heard, to understand their living situation that is unknown to other people. That is, of course, part of my concern too. But I'm more interested in almost the opposite question, because I think their voice is not heard, but it's true. But what is more important is that they are changing the world. They are building the very important part of processes such as globalization. So what I have been trying to do is to figure out all these multi-layered processes, such as you said, in the individual decisions and the family relations, marriage proposals, patterns, and the training. I'm now talking the IT case, the Indian global shopping study, and the IT training programs, and then the relation between agriculture and the small town industry. I mean, in South India, actually, one of the most important industries is the film industry. And the big city like Hyderabad, at that time, they're already experiencing real estate boom. They are all related to each other. And then at the end, you see how South India, countryside in South India, and places like Australia, which is a semi-periphery in the global system. I mean, the Indians go there because they can't go to Silicon Valley yet. They go to Australia in order to move to California. They're not terribly interested in Australia in the beginning. Some, of course, later stayed on and they found, oh, it's a nice weather, good lifestyle, etc. And then you can see the whole the globalization is certainly not a flat process. Right? It is many layers. You have the macro multi-layer, geopolitical structure. The U.S. I mean, within U.S. also, I also followed lots of debate at that time about your H-1B visa problem, whether or not it will displace workers. And you can see very clear divide between California and the rest of part of the US already. So some people are more worried about labor rights, job security, and other people are really arguing for innovation. We have to be ahead of the rest of part of the world. And in order to do that, we have to have talents from all over the world. So different discourses. I mean, within the US, it's differentiated. And then globally, you have the center, periphery, semi-periphery. And inside of India, you have Hyderabad and the small rural town like Guntur, and then the villages I'm mainly looking at the coastal Andhra area in the southeast Andhra Pradesh, which is in turn a state in southeast India. So that is what fascinates me. There's no kind of one-line conclusion to say, okay, world is moving towards that direction. I'm not able to do that, but I hope that ethnography is a particular type of text that tells you how the world is constituted, how the things are so big, of which, which that everyone is a part of, actually is constituted and related to some people very far away, as if, it's completely cut off from us. So therefore, the world is interconnected, but in a very complex way and a fundamentally unequal way. So similar, the earlier work, Zhejiangcun is about migrant workers in Beijing. I mean, they are marginal, they are small players. But my interest is not just to say, they have their own agency. So they are, we should give them dignity and recognition. I don't think they need dignity and recognition given by us. Yes, no, they have their own world. They know very well how to build a better life, and they know they are suffering, and they know they have to cope with it. They don't talk about it, carry on. That is most people, ordinary people do in the world. So therefore, my business is to document that. To not talk about how terribly the pain are, but to say they are doing all the things with some sense of humor, optimism, and build up a economic system in South Beijing, which really force the local government to change policies in many regards. But
so in many ways, you're recognizing their agency.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
So not like weapons of the weak that as intellectuals we're giving back an agency that they have lost. I mean, my simplistic read on much of what you do is that we have sort of a happy version of globalization, which is face talk, we're all connected, isn't this wonderful? Mm-hmm. And then we have this evil empire version of globalization in which McDonald's is suppressing good food throughout the world, and all good jobs have gone to China or to Vietnam. But what you're saying, it seems to me, and please correct me, is that within these processes, it's important to look at what people actually do and how they exercise their agency. People can fight back without considering what they're doing as a form of resistance. They're just changing lifestyles or adapting in very different ways. I wonder if you could tell the story about the marriage proposal you got while you were in Australia, and relate it to these themes of how these huge processes impact on local practices and very important life decisions.
Yeah, no, that's it. For ordinary people, like a marriage and family formation,
There's nothing more
the
important.
thing,
Right.
yeah. And often we forget about that. We think, okay, wars and financial crises are important as they are, but once you come to everyday life, how your son and daughter get married, or how yourself get married, when you can buy an apartment in which part of city, that's your life. And you mentioned the marriage proposal. And of course, that was many years ago when I was doing my PhD, and my family, I actually left China at the age of 26. So, I belong to the older generation of overseas students from China. Nowadays, students go overseas to study at a much younger age.
Right?
Yeah, that's a huge change. And I went overseas the first time at the age of 26, and my parents are teachers, so they're kind of more enlightened in the local setting, but nevertheless, I think they're under pressure, to make sure that the children will get married and not too late. Yeah, and so I don't know how actively they solicited this, but anyway, they told me, they are receiving proposals from entrepreneurial families in my hometown, Wenzhou, which is a city known for its very vibrant private economy. So there are lots of people, small family business, but they make money. So in terms of savings, they are quite rich, but not necessarily in terms of how much capital they hold, but they have money for their life. And as they receive proposals, they say, okay, since I got a certain kind of cultural capital, because I graduated from Beijing University, which is okay university in China, and then I was doing a PhD in Oxford. Presumably, I will get as a degree, so I have the title of doctor. And so some families are willing to have their daughter to marry me but they didn't really specify. I don't know how they talk with my parents, but basically the hint is that they are very happy to at least cover all the cost of wedding and cover the cost of setting up a family, which is quite a lot, because you have to buy an apartment as a whole, all the furniture and a car. At that time started already, car, house. And of course, I was at that time, the first reaction is slightly annoyed. Oh my God, it's not, even you're my parents, but it's not your business. And why do you? But they put it in a polite way, so it's not too intrusive. I was annoyed. Then I feel it's funny, but then I started thinking about this, precisely because I worked on India and I see how dowry works in Indian context. If you don't mind, probably very briefly to mention what the dowry is about. Of course, dowry is the bride's family, the amount of money or in kind paid to the groom's, the man's family.
Their buy-in, their investment in.
Yeah, for the marriage, and we often assume that dowry is a very ancient customs in India. That is true to some extent, because now we have historical evidence to show that in older days, the family do give some kind of jewelry or symbolic items to the daughter when the daughter marry out from family and marry into the groom's household. That is understandable. When a daughter leaving, you give something, and partly as a security. In case the daughter is abused, she has a last resort. But the dowry, as we know today, which is calculated and is often quantified in cash terms, is very modern. It happened only in 19th century, started emerging in 19th century. And during my field work, I found one village practiced dowry, first time ever, I think in 1996. Now before that, they were practicing the opposite we call the groom wealth. So now it's bride wealth. Is that the man have to pay money to get
Bride
married?
price, maybe?
Bride price, yeah. So the man, I mean, which is the common practice in China. So now the burden is very high. And why? Why it is so modern? Why 19th century actually started in Calcutta, the first record. And in my record in Andhra Pradesh, it's 1996. It is because 19th century colonialism. Suddenly you have educated boys can join the colonial government as first of all soldiers, and later as lawyers, as civil servants. And once you join the colonial government, you are entering an entirely different world as compared to the local society, because you are earning salary counted in British shilling. And the power, the status is completely different. So therefore, the local rich family are very interested, putting it that way, wanted to create connections with this man. So how do you do that? Pay large amount dowry. And in 1996, the village that I did I didn't stay there. That is not exactly where I stayed. They had the first college student graduated, and a doctor, and he demanded dowry. He reversed
He demanded it.
Yeah, he demanded dowry, because that is, I studied, now have the status, I will earn money.
Once it's out there in the economy, you can ask for it, right? It's a
Yeah. So that's then and also he could demand, and it doesn't sound bad at all in the local society, because at that time the high caste, the high society in the city are practicing dowry.
Okay.
So there is a very strong notion, at least when I was in India, that you practice dowry, it is kind of a part of a modernization. You are moving up. Okay. Only the outer caste, the untouchable people, don't practice dowry. And it is a high caste, urban, the people who have means practice dowry. I mean, it's entirely logical, because in the 19th century, it is these people who enter the colonial government that practice dowry. Right. So it is something actually to look up to. So anyway, then Silicon Valley, how is that related to my story? And then during my field work, I found all these people mention dowry all the time. And the dowry went up quite significantly in the late 1990s. Why is that? Because in the area I did the field work, many people now were trained as IT technicians. They moved to the US, at that time, because people worried about this so-called 2KY bug, because the year 2000, the way the older airline banking system used to use a 2-digit to mark the year, like 19, but now you don't know is 1919 or 2019.
Yes, so I remember we thought the world was going to fall apart.
Yeah, so then you need lots of people to fix that problem. So there's a labor shortage. So Indian IT workers could go overseas quickly, and they earn US dollars, right? It's probably still low at the Silicon Valley level, but it's a completely different story as compared to Indian local society. So immediately, this rupture created the dynamics that dowry increases. So then I can see how ironic was this supposed to be globalization and the rationalization and modernity, but the people turn around, ask for dowry. There are also cases, body shopping book you can look at, and the people demand the dowry already, on the condition that I'm going to US next month, so now we fix a marriage and I go. But when they arrive,
like a futures market.
Exactly, in a way, yeah. And that is also cultural, because the family want you to settle about your marriage before you go overseas. And once you go overseas, the parents feel they can't control you anymore. Right. So the marriage is the anchor to tie the son to the family. And then when you arrive in the US, no job, because the body shopping is a very kind of volatile. Means the market is very volatile, and the body shopping is a particular way of managing labor transnationally, which is not a very stable, not a very reliable. It's all kind of full of uncertainties, and it's very common. They went to the US, they couldn't find a job, and they were so-called put on the bench, basically waiting. And they couldn't have no salary, but then the marriage has been fixed already, and
So they live off the dowry for a while.
Oh no, they have not received it
got the
because
dowry yet. Oh,
just
okay.
the ordeal. It's a future market. It's not materialized until the wedding takes place.
To cash in the contract. Okay.
And then the Go's family keep asking, when are you coming back to perform our wedding? No, because before they left, the ceremony has not taken place. And under tremendous pressure, cannot tell the truth. There's no job. I can't go back either because there's no salary, because he's supposed to bring back some money from the US. Right. Anyway, so all this story. And then now I'm faced with a proposal of myself.
That must have made you feel like, well, I'm part of the same globalizing weirdness that's going on here, right? I mean,
yeah, but then what really triggered me here is that I was thinking, why so sudden? These things that happen. I mean, in China, traditional in countryside, is a bride price. And then in city, I mean, there's no such a thing at all. And my own parents got married with a small tea party. Some candies, orange, peanuts, roasted peanuts, and tea with colleagues. They were colleagues in a rural school. I mean, that was in 1950s, 1960s, marriage carried out. And then now, why this thought is quite natural to have that kind of negotiation taking place, but it's so new, but yet people feel it's logical. So that is also making me think. The so-called culture and so-called social norm and custom actually are very adaptable. Sure. And in order to understand that, we have to look at the larger political economy, and. In my case, that kind of marriage proposal took place, has lots to do with privatization, has lots to do with the property market. That is, again, part of privatization, because before everything, the housing is all public. And then social stratification. People were very keen to convert their financial capital into cultural status in order to maintain the privilege that they just accumulated now, because that. Like my parents and a little younger, they're the first generation who kind of experience social stratification as a result of market economy. Right? So once you get a little money, you want to think away how you can keep it, make it lasting. So of course, marriage and converting into some social status is a way to do it. So then go back to your question. Yeah, it's look at how the large picture political economy affect all of us, but also in turn to think, what is our role in this large system? So therefore, it's a little different from weapon of the week idea. Number one, I don't feel that the dichotomy works very well, especially in the context of China or Asia today. What is weak, what is strong are really intermingled, Actually, weak can use lots of weapon of strong as well, meaning that one typical weapon of the weak is that you talk on the back, hidden script. But the weak now can speak loudly in social media. The question is that how can we intellectuals help them to articulate certain demand?
This might be a good time to switch to your current concerns with the platform economy, because that sort of remixes all of these elements in that what's the weak in the platform economy?
Yes.
How do you speak back? They give, internet commentary sections are there to allow you to express yourself, or Facebook is there to allow you to express yourself. But at the same time, Facebook, Google, or the Chinese equivalents are all harvesting our data to sell us things. Yeah. We're barely aware of what is, we like it without realizing what we're doing to support them. It's sort of like when a primitive version of this was clothes that put their brand on, and you buy them and advertise for them. So you're doing their work for them.
Yes.
Because you think Tommy Hilfiger is cool,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But this is at a much larger, global,
Exactly.
complex scale where
Yeah.
the algorithms guide our behavior. I mean, we make a conscious choice that Tommy Hilfiger looks good on my sweater, but this goes way beyond that. I don't know if I'm accurately describing your concerns or not.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. That is, I think, one of the biggest challenges today. Like at the time when I was doing Zhejiang Cun, and the idea was that you have a domain called the social life, which is a kinship and community relations, where people have their own dignity because it's a face-to-face communication. You have to show respect, and you can negotiate. I mean, you can say in Habermas terms, there's a kind of communicative rationality. You seek a certain justice by sort it out in a bilateral and more or less equal way. And then we say, oh, there is such a thing as a state bureaucracy, which is top-down and it's depersonalized. And there's such a thing as a market, which is a profit maximization. And the Zhejiang Cun story is to say, okay, how these people, small people, use their own social networks and can deal with state bureaucracy or protect themselves from state bureaucracy, and at the same time they break in to the mainstream market to profit, right? So therefore, and when the market become too when everything, the commodification process go too far. I mean, this does not happen in Zhejiang Cun, but in many other parts of the world. So you have the famous Karl Polanyi's thesis to say, then we need a social protection. We need to consider welfare and protect family, protect the community, and etc. But in platform economy, the current one, and I call the kind of society market, the problem is that that kind of divide no longer exists, meaning that we don't have this kind of basic base or basic weapon, basic resources with which we can protect ourselves from market. Because what I call the society market, the market itself becomes a society, right? So all our social function, love and dating and the greeting and the communication and discussion, participating in public events, everything now is carried out in such the ecosystem or the infrastructure provided by these giant corporations, right? So then where everyone is inside, and as you said, David, everyone feel empowered.
Right.
And it is a very participatory. Of course, all these companies do not want to exclude anyone. We're talking about, we should not let anyone lag behind. This is exactly what Facebook or Alibaba is doing. They certainly don't want anyone to out. Everyone come in. Everyone have access to credit, have loans, have immediate access to all these modern, latest finance products, services, make your life extremely convenient. But at the same time, of course, you are trapped, and we contribute our data, and we become dependent on them. So it is almost going back to the 18th century. Someone called this new feudalism, right? So these companies are like owning huge land, and we are paying rent to them in order to carry out our social life. So then it's politically very relevant. Many people are worried about that, discussing that. And I think what we want to do is to carry out systematic and careful investigation to figure out, as I said, how exactly this big thing is created layer by layer through everyday, people's practices. For example, it's a relation between the user and the platform. How should one understand that? And then user and the user, the relations like service deliverer, service provider, and the service user who met through platform. What is their relation? I mean, it's very different from the relations that they experienced before platform, right? So then we see this kind of a multi-layered relation, how come together and lead to this structure. And hopefully, and why do we do that? It's not only to explain what's going on. That explanation is very important. But by looking at this multi-layered relations, we also try to find where the cracks are, where the loopholes are. Because I have worked with the middleman and the labor recruitment, another project. And the middleman and the intermediaries, I mean, they are very good in identifying all these loopholes.
Exploiting anything that's there.
And then they don't want to violate rule outright, but they want to find the loopholes, then they can circumvent, right? So then they can do business legally.
A form of rent seeking.
Exactly.
Right.
Have extra profit by doing that. And then I'm thinking, why shouldn't we also become middlemen? You identify the loopholes in the current structure. I mean, loopholes is, in Lenin's word, is the weakest link in the chain of imperialism or the global capitalism, where we can probably do something in order to loosen the structure or make a change. Yeah.
To sum up then, maybe on research, loopholes and profit and rent seeking apart, it seems to me that one thread that you've sort of followed, and this is simplistic because I haven't done your research, I've just read about it, is focus on agency without glorifying agency.
Yes, exactly.
And you follow it through various different contexts in China, where agency was quite suppressed for a long time. Reform and opening allowed a new expression of agency in the market and in mobility. And then in India, it becomes global. And now with the platform economy, it's truly global in the sense that it's everywhere, and we live our lives through a platform that's barely visible except in its most attractive aspects. So what you're hoping to do, it seems to me, is to find where agency is within all that. What does it mean now that we have opted in to our feudal owners, and what loopholes exist for us? I mean, at the very least, we should be conscious of how our data supports what they're doing, which is not easy to do, actually.
Yeah, as that part, we will need a multidisciplinary study, anthropology will be not we don't know enough to figure a question like that out. Yeah, but the question of agency here is to find where agency is, but more importantly for me is to find where potential agency is, and also what the potential this agency has. So the point is not to say these people have agency, but the point is that actually people can use this agency to do even more. And our research is to enable them to imagine that they can do more, and they can organize their agency in even more powerful and effective ways. Here I want, agency is such a big word in anthropology. Again, I just feel not very comfortable to say, a way to discover that these people have agency. And then we often forget researchers have their own agencies. We forget our own agencies. And what is our agency? This is another question that we want to think here. So for me, we must come to do research. We must have our own concerns, and we must have a certain purpose. And the purpose should not be instrumental and short term, like applied policy research. No, to solve any problem immediately. No, but you have a concern and you want to address that concerns, and then we have to locate our agency quite accurately. I mean, we cannot really share the completely new light to reality and discover some big bang laws hidden somewhere.
No, it's not a huge light bulb that's going to come on it.
No, yeah, we should be embedded small candles or light bulb, and then to facilitate, to enable people themselves to rediscover their own agency, and particularly to think how can they use their agency. Yeah.
We just talked about Biao's sort of research profile over the last 20 or 30 years in a rapid 8 to 10 minutes. Now we're moving on to the book in question, which is the subject of our interview, a book called Self as Method, which is in fact a series of 3 interviews conducted by Wu Qi, a very talented young journalist in China, with Biao over the course of 2017, 2018, something like that?
Yeah, probably 3 years, over 3 years.
Something like that. In any event, to put it in some kind of context, Biao and Wu Qi and I spoke by Skype or something 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I had some questions about the book, and Wu Qi, who I think was sort of the originator of the idea, answered in ways that I thought were quite revealing. If I can sum up what Wu Qi said, it was that, it's very intriguing to me, that China now in 2020 or 2015, when Wu Qi thought up the idea, had pretty much achieved what China had been hoping to achieve over the past 150 years. I mean, China was the center of the world in China, and in fact in much of the world, until the Opium Wars, or until the prelude to the Opium Wars. So until the 19th century, China was king at some level. And then China was toppled in very unpolite ways, shall we say, beginning in the 1800s. And the fall was rapid and painful. And China, ever since the loss of the Opium Wars, has been trying to get back on track and to achieve the wealth and power necessary to make China the China it wanted to be. And with reform and opening, very rapidly, China found a sort of rhythm, maybe some sort of third way between capitalism and authoritarianism or socialism, so that in 2015, flash forward, China is pretty rich. At least the major cities don't look much different from cities in the West. Some Chinese cities look much better than some cities in the West. Chinese airports look better than all airports throughout most of the rest of the world. I invite you to visit the United States or New York, compare Shanghai's airport or Beijing's airport with any New York airport. You will vote for China on the airport ticket. In terms of wealth, they're doing pretty well. This means in terms of modernity as well. Take Chinese trains. There's a network of high-speed trains that covers virtually all of China. I invite you, again by way of comparison, to spend a day with Amtrak in the United States. You will again vote for China, I am quite sure. And China is powerful on the world stage in a way it has not been for 100 years, 150 years, or maybe ever. I'm not quite sure, because the world stage has changed a great deal. Despite all this, despite China having achieved something like the China dream, Wu Qi's observation, with which Zhang Biao I think concurs, is that a lot of Chinese people didn't feel all that happy. Instead of feeling joyous and fulfilled, a lot of Chinese people, and particularly Chinese young people, to whom the book is largely addressed, are incredibly stressed out. They're stressed out because work is hard in China. A common way of referring to the work regime in China is 996, that you work from 9 in the morning to 9 at night, 6 days a week. And that's sort of the light version. There are other versions where you don't get any time off at all. And this is a pretty universal way of working in China. And it's hard, it's competitive. With China's rise in urbanization, and they've been largely parallel, or they're reaffirming or mutually reaffirming, housing prices have gone through the roof in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, any of the places where people want to live. We'll talk about centers and peripheries in a little while. There's a very strong urge or yearning in China to be where the action is, which means urban centers, which is all well and good. And it's true that, at least for a while anyway, I had younger Western friends who thought of Beijing as the new Berlin, and were settling in there and going to bars and going to art openings, and it was a really happening place, which perhaps it still is, I'm not quite sure. But in any event, what happens whenever this kind of thing happens is that prices go up. And they have gone up to the point that many people, young people in China, are sort of freaking out. They say, all right, 10 years ago, my cousin's parents could help him or her buy an apartment, but it took all their savings. Now, 10 years on, the prices are still going up, and my parents' savings won't work. So what do? Do I move to a lesser city? Do I give up? In fact, one term that's been in the news lately in China is this idea of tangping. It's called lying flat. It's a phenomenon you find in Japan and elsewhere too. I mean, in the States, I don't know about Germany, we talk about kind of a slacker culture where you just kind of kick back and don't do much. I don't know quite how to compare that with China, but the notion is that I just can't stand it anymore. I work and I work and I work, but I'm just running in place. I can't get ahead. So there are all these pressures, some of which are political, most of which are economic, and just a general malaise, a general, I don't know, not feeling good about where I am or necessarily where China is. And that's what I understand the book was trying to address. And how it got to you, you might explain to them how Wu Qi found you and how you saw your participation in this exercise.
Yeah, I think I mean, that is a very nice, very broad historical contextualization of the project. I think before Wu Qi came to meet me, we have another friend, Luo Danni, who is the editor.
The editor, right.
Yeah, the editor. I think she actually talked to Wu Qi and had this idea. And there was a sense, as you said, okay, materially we have achieved a great deal in China, but somehow we're not happy. We need certain explanations about our living conditions. And of course, there are lots of explanations. There are lots of statements. But in Chinese term, all these statements and explanations are often 不接地气. 不接地气, it means that it's not grounded, does not speak to people's daily experiences directly.
It doesn't hit the mark, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they're all kind of floating around. Right. I mean, they make sense in their own terms, but not hook you in.
Right.
So young people are not happy, and actually make them more confused, because when they listen to all this big talk, it makes sense, but then look at their own life, it's a different story. So they said, okay, we should have some kind of explanations that will hit the mark, 接地气. And then I was very happy to hear this kind of proposal, because I am also struggling. I mean, of course, I'm a little older. I'm the generation actually benefited from the open up and the reform after 1978, because I went to university in 1990, so my education was never interrupted. Unlike the people who are older than me, education was interrupted by Cultural Revolution, etc. I had uninterrupted education, but this also means my generation had very little social exposure. And then after graduation, we are still among the generation where few could go to university. So once you went to university, almost guaranteed you have a good job. And then the economy just grows so fast. So wherever you have a degree, you are in that part, you just ride on. I mean, so you salary, and automatically, life become better. Of course, life for people who cannot, did not have education, college education will be tougher. But still, we will say the cake is becoming bigger, so everyone's share is becoming slightly bigger. So my generation still is luckier than the current one. But personally, I also have this problem of 地气 problem, this groundedness. I went overseas and struggled through and got a PhD, had a job, and became full professor in Oxford, which sounds all good.
But it is all good, yes.
Yes, but also I'm not very happy because I feel my research and my work is kind of schizophrenia. I mean, I wanted to address what I'm worried about, but then I found out what I'm worried about is not the established academic circle worried about, right? They are more worried about how you are going to reinterpret Foucault, and how you bring in new materialism to interpretation of affect.
For you, those weren't hitting the mark.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting in their own terms.
Right, in abstract terms, but
exactly.
It's not addressing a reality that you were deeply concerned about.
Yeah, does not touch my soul. So I think in this sense, the feeling of mine and the feeling of Chinese young people are quite similar. Not same, but similar. So then I think we're both seeking a sense of organicity. The organicity of thinking, the thinking that will address our concern and go beyond just express our all kind of feelings, but analyze it, right? You through kind of a careful, rigorous analysis to address what we are worried about. So I think as they come together.
I wonder why, and this may be a strange question, why did they ask an intellectual? if this book had been written in the United States, Oprah would have written it, or Ellen DeGeneres, some celebrity with a lot of appeal, or a football player. I don't know. It would have been a terrible book in the American context, but it would never occur to us to seek out an intellectual to do that. I wonder what that says about Chinese society, that Lo Daniyan and Wu Qi said, let's find a professor to talk about this stuff.
That's interesting. I mean, of course, being a Chinese, I found what needed to be explained is the anti-intellectualism in the U.S.
Well, we can go there too, but...
Yeah. But then in China, first of all, there is kind of element of anti-intellectualism in China too.
Sure.
And in 2004, the very influential kind of newspaper called Nanfang Renwu, it is supplementary to Nanfang Zhoumo as the same group. The Southern
Weekend.
Figures, yeah, Southern Weekend, then supplementary called Figures of People. And they published a list of public intellectuals. And in 2004, that was a hit. And think, oh, we have public intellectuals in China, which is kind of supposed to be a new figure. And these are people actually from not only academic, but also civil society. And they have, they will represent the public consciousness, and they represent the public concern, they speak for the public. But actually in less than 5 years, and the term public intellectual became a negative one, become a kind of laugh stock. It means people who know, it's a kind of, what do you say, jack of a trade?
No, we would say talking heads.
Okay, yeah.
Talking heads, or even eggheads.
Okay.
People who are either too smart for their own good, or who talk all the time without knowing anything.
Exactly,
And that's either of those works. It depends on the context, right?
Then they have kind of standard discourse for almost everything.
Yes,
they apply that for everything, and sound very aloof, but no 地气, doesn't hit the mark.
Yes, I can think of any number of Western examples, but we will not go there.
So that is there's a bit of element of anti-intellectualism as well, but probably it's not same as anti-intellectualism in the U.S. But in China, I think the young people are still look up on the learning is still very much respected. And I suppose there's another big difference is, I suppose, in the U.S., the working class population and have becoming more consolidated. And they see the gap between the people who are marginalized in new economy on one hand, and then you have the Silicon Valley people and the Wall Street people and the Washington people and the cultural elite on the other side, on the other camp. Probably the gap is so large that the marginalized population just think that people do not understand our life and they cannot speak for us or speak to us. In China, they still have a widespread middle-class dream. And all these young people are still hoping to move to big cities, to go through university, and then to join the mainstream kind of, not necessarily elite, but the kind of mainstream culture.
Right.
So they see inequalities, but the society is not really ruptured in their sense to think, okay, all this, when they think the talk head is become irrelevant, is not because they just think these people have not done enough research. And
okay. So there's still an ideal of someone who could
yes, absolutely
speak truth of some sort.
Yeah, it's not because they think, oh, these people have such a privilege, material privilege. They are speaking to pretend to defend their own position rather than speak to us. They are not thinking that way. Yeah.
I wonder if another factor is, one time I remember going to look at best-selling books in China. It's not something I do often, but I went a couple of times. And what struck me was that I think out of the first 5 bestsellers, 3 or 4 were how-to books. How to make money, how to, I don't remember what the others were, how to move to the cities. Most of them were very concrete how-to sorts of things. How to dress for success. And these are everywhere. But I was surprised that 3 of the first 5 were. I mean, your book is kind of not a direct how-to book, but it addresses those concerns that young people wondering, how should I think about my life or other people's
Yeah.
lives around me?
Yeah.
How should I, not necessarily how do I get ahead, but how do I anchor myself in life? And I wonder if that didn't play into it somehow.
Oh.
Because it's an interview in which you speak about your personal journey and your personal problems and how you've succeeded and where you've not succeeded as well as you could. So it's not a treatise. It's not it's not your academic work. It's just your conversation
Yeah.
with a smart young journalist asking pertinent questions. And actually, I never told you this before, but before starting your book, I have a Chinese friend in Montreal who's come back to China now. He's maybe 25 or 30 years old. He got stuck there because of the coronavirus. Really, really smart guy who likes Chinese intellectuals. So he discovered my website. We talked about various things. So I said, have you read this Xiang Biao's book? And he said, yeah. What did you think about it? You know, I wanted to make sure you weren't just Oprah, right? And he said, oh, yeah, we would like that. And yeah, I read it and I got a lot out of it. So that's quite a phenomenon. I can't imagine that happening in the United States, where an intellectual could wind up addressing the concerns of young people. But maybe I'm completely wrong. I have no idea.
Yeah, no, well, potentially, I think anyone can do that, I suppose. But now go back to question, you know, the how-to, the notion, and then it is not a genre, right, but it is a kind of a way to convey some ideas by highlighting the notion of method.
Right.
This goes back to our, you know, the previous episode, the conversation about the agency.
Sure, right.
Everyone knows they have agencies. The question is that how do they exercise their agency? And for people who want to make a change in their life and possibly make change in their surroundings, probably not the entire society, they always look at the world through the question of how. Right? And
makes sense.
Yeah. So is that first of all, is how the society become like that, which is probably a descriptive needed some description to figure out. And then the question is that how can I change? How can I fit in? Right? So this how question. So that's kind of the method. Angle, I think, speak to people in that way. Otherwise, it just become a very innate or passive account of what's going on, but cannot bring the people into that picture. So I think that is something all researchers can do in the future. We describe. I mean, the research in a way is to give a picture to people. You know, then like a map. But then you should have the people themselves in the map, and the people know how they can move on from here. And of course, this book, if it's a hit, and also partly because it's very different from the existing how to do bestseller, because then that type of book just reduce life into very instrumental calculations. Young people don't like it either. I mean, they buy it. I really doubt someone will really read it through. They buy it because part of anxiety. They think, I have to learn how to do it, etc. But they're not satisfied because everybody is actually far more intellectual than anyone just, pursue life in an instrumentalist way. People want a meaning. People want a sense of dignity. People want a certain intellectual satisfaction. So I think probably our book delivers that part, but without losing this kind of how-to spirit. That may explain why many people find it interesting.
Were you surprised that it became such a big success?
Well, I was surprised, yeah. And I mean, of course, we had the aim that we want to talk to large audience, but inevitably we didn't design the book very carefully. To be honest, in the beginning, we did not decide. Okay, we target like university-educated urban youth, or we target more like who are doing graduate studies, because there's lots of research method content is there as well. We didn't. It's mainly thinking through my own life and etc. Actually, now you look back, there's lots of things actually there's no reason that why most people will feel interesting, because there's lots of research topic, research method, and theory, and etc. So I don't know. That is, I will have to reflect on that. I mean, if we design more consciously, actually it'll be better. Or maybe this version is better because then it, many people, young people who are not interested in academic research per se, also have exposure to social science, which may be interesting to them as well. So I was surprised that given the book has so many kind of academic stuff in it, it is still the reach to far beyond academics.
Maybe it's just the moment. Many successful books happen to hit the market or feel the market pulse without necessarily knowing. I don't know how marketing works in publishing. It seems to me very difficult to target a particular group. I don't know. But in any event, it did work. And as I said earlier on, it sparked a lot of interaction with you and among various WeChat groups in China. And I think it's quite admirable that it had that effect. And I would say also, from a Western point of view, it goes completely against the stereotypes we have about China, which is that China is a very top-down society, which it is, but to the extent that people don't have their own agency, that they can't rethink their own lives, or that they're just passive, right? And the response to your book illustrates that that's certainly not the case, that there are people out there thinking for themselves, and that's what self as method means. It means let yourself go, and you're thinking for yourself. Work through your life, think about things in systematic ways, connect yourself to your reality and to broader structures if you can, and have faith. It seems to me that's pretty much the method, which you refract through various social science experiences and theories. Again, it's a very remarkable book. We've discussed fairly broad topics about your research in the book, and now I want to move into some more thematic issues. Some of the themes that you raise in your book, and which make perfect sense to a Chinese audience, will have different meanings for the Western audience, which is fine. It's nice to see things with different meanings, but it would be helpful, I think, to Western readers to know what these differences are and not to have to figure them out on their own. One of those themes is the 1980s. The 1980s is a decade and is as an intellectual or a cultural experience. I don't know what most Westerners think when they think the 1980s, but people like me who work on China, who think about China in the 1980s, think of liberation, basically. That China in the 1980s had just got past Mao Zedong, had just got over the Cultural Revolution, had reoriented itself toward the market economy, toward the world. Most intellectuals and students were talking about Western stuff. There were vast translation projects in which it's obvious that Chinese intellectuals and students were thirsting after the knowledge they couldn't have for 40 years, 30 or 40 years. And it's continued to this day. China's translation efforts are admirable and huge. The amount of money that goes into that makes translators like me very envious. Most people thought, I mean, China started its reforms. It was a much more open society. Most people outside of China particularly, but also some inside China, were predicting that democracy of some sort was a real possibility and would come sooner rather than later. So if it's possible to be nostalgia for someone else's past, which I'm not sure it is, Westerners are nostalgia for China of the 1980s. That's what, when we talk about now, and people in the Trump administration or the Biden administration will talk about China having gone wrong somewhere. The 1980s was when China was going right. In your book, however, you're not talking from that perspective at all. It's a very different internal perspective where you have very complex and ambivalent feelings about the 1980s. And I wonder if you could explain what it means to you, what the 1980s represent, what did it try to do, if we can speak about a decade trying to do something? What is its legacy? I'm sure there were good sides and bad sides. In any event, just unpack that for readers who won't have lived it as a Chinese person.
I mean, I do have a deep ambivalent feeling towards the 1980s, and precisely because it influenced me so much. I became interested in social thought and social questions when I was in high school. That was in 1985 to 1990, so the later 1980s, and actually there was a peak of so-called cultural fever or cultural craze, and a large number of books were published, and including many translations of all these kind of post-modern Western philosophies. So I read, most of course, were far too difficult. I remember like the 走向未来丛书, a book series called Marching Towards the Future, were very influential. And then there's many book series at that time. And so that time, as you write, in the 1980s, definitely, it is an era of very active cultural debates. And that's also an era of many vanguard artistic experimentation.
So all this is good. What's the bad side of that?
And then the question is, why such kind of era were ended with 1989? And the standard answer is, of course, because it went too far and the party suppressed it, it became too liberal. That, now I'm thinking back, I have some doubt about that. If you look at the 1989, what really happened, of course, you have radical students who demand radical reform, privatization, multi-party democracy system immediately now. But there's so many people who went to the street to support them, was worried about something else. Two things. Number one, corruption, which is a directly result of the so-called dual-track system. I mean, that's about the price reform. We don't have time to go into that. So number two is inflation. The 1988, I think the inflation rate is nearly 20%. Yeah, for a country, socialist country, people never experienced any fluctuation of price. Suddenly you have 20% of inflation a year. It's very rife, it's very threatening.
And a lot of people on fixed incomes too.
Yeah, so that was and then people thought, okay, we need a radical change. And so that's a very different concern. Then they came together and they call for very radical change. And that call, in my view, split the leadership within the party. So the 1989, in my view, actually is not a conservative, anti-reform state suppressing the liberal force per se, but more importantly is the split of the party leadership. Some fraction was supportive of radical change, and the other part think it's absolutely a wrong path. Yeah, impossible. So then you have this kind of the violent crackdown on the student. Actually, is a reflection of the internal struggle in the party. Why do I say that? Why the framework of conservative state party versus vis-a-vis liberal society is wrong? If we look at through the 1980s, the line is really not drawn between state and society. The line is between reformists. Actually, the most influential reformists are inside of the state. We know there is, the so-called the four famous research institutes, including the State Council Research Center, was a kind of a leading voice for radical reform. And then you have the party Central Research Office for system change, system reform, 体制改革. The top think tank arguing for radical reform. And then you have another part is more cautious about reform, also including element from the state as well as the society as well. So the line is not like a state vis-a-vis society. So what went wrong here is now I'm thinking is probably the reformist, which including both state and the non-state actors, became detached from the life experiences of many people.
So they were missing
in
the
the
mark
society.
in the way that,
Exactly.
right.
And they were following, in 1986, there's a famous conference on a cruise in the Yangtze River when the Chicago School of Economics was introduced, which actually led to the very dramatic pricing system reform, which again led to inflation I mentioned.
right.
Yeah. So then this, the mainstream Western economics theory was introduced, and also political thinking were introduced, lots of culture. So the reformist elite actually became ever more radical in that direction and detached from the living condition of many people who are actually still believe in socialism. Because the material resource is still quite limited, and the priority is that how everyone can a little more, but on equal terms. So there's a rupture between the two. So the 1980s now, I look back, I benefited greatly from the debate because I knew of all the theories and the terms from that debate, but also I can see that kind of framework, that kind of theories are interesting theories themselves, but does not really help us to understand the core contradiction of that time.
In the book, you talk often, excuse me, you
Yeah.
talk a lot about sort of an intellectual style that's attached to the 1980s, which is attached to grand gestures
Yeah.
and grand slogans.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking about here?
Exactly. And that is a manifestation of this rupture, precisely because, the reformist thinking was really, I think in principle, they are all quite right. I mean, I don't disagree with them in principle at all. But the way they articulate, the way identify key problems were really captured by this quite aloof theories.
Sort of a flight to abstraction.
Exactly.
Instead of a grounding in what was really happening within China. And this sort of describes, I don't know, trends in the social sciences as well, or trends in scholarship? Or was this largely within the realm of policy and policy reform?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, 1980s, the reason was so lively. It's a genuinely lively debate. And it's precisely because the boundary between policy thinking and academic research and art are really blurred.
Right.
So it was only after 1990s we have this professionalization,
Exactly,
therefore demarcation, and therefore become less interesting.
Right.
And the 1980s, you can see a bit of like 1960s London or Berlin. People where you have this kind of circle who are very senior cadres but interested in thinking and research, and then you have young people who are very familiar with Western theories. And you have artists, they all come together, discuss.
Right.
So that is good part, really good part. But the problem is that there's no enough empirical research, there's too much conviction in certain big principles, but not realities.
Okay, so if we sum that up, we might say the 1980s were in a certain sense a missed opportunity, that instead of building an ecology that would work, there was a flight toward abstraction, and perhaps there was a certain hope that ready-made Western ideas would come in and save China.
Yeah.
So it was not a refusal to look at reality, but a preference to look at something abstract or distant or other.
Exactly. I think you put it very nicely, David. It's a missed opportunity. Of course, we should not blame the intellectuals at that time,
not. That's
right?
not the idea.
And if given time, they may change, they may mature, they may say, all these empathy theories probably it's too empty, interesting, but not. Let's now go do more empirical, careful field research, right? And gradually it may develop a healthy ecology. But the political system is such. Then when the radical voice become too powerful and the party, and the party state does not have a mature mechanisms to accommodate this. And actually, in this sense, the party state system is quite vulnerable. Once you have quite different views, the party state is not able to go beyond that to say, okay, yeah, you have different views, let me to bring them together.
Right.
They are not capable of doing that, even though they are very capable in many other things, administratively or militarily, but they are not very capable in synthesize different views, etc. So once the view becomes so widely split within the elite circle, so the party state feels they have to take side, and then you have some it cannot reconcilable. Yeah.
I think a symbol of that, you've talked about it in your book, was this television series called River Elegy, which aired right before Tiananmen.
Yeah.
And it's, you can find it on YouTube, I think. I'm not sure there are subtitles, but River Elegy basically sees a binary opposition between China and the rest of the world. And there's the blue world of the seas and the yellow world of China's soil.
Yes.
And it's presented in this very tendentious sort of voice, overly dramatic. And if I were a leader in China, I would not have liked that at all, because it was not using research to find solutions other than we have to become just like the blue oceans, right? So is that sort of the stuff you're...
Exactly, but you may be surprised that the party secretary general recommended this.
I am very surprised.
Yeah, to foreign visitors, to say we have a very interesting TV series you should watch.
It's good to show foreign visitors, I suppose, right?
Yeah, and but I think genuinely at that time, because people were in that kind of mood, self-denial, but self-denial in a very kind of hopeful, optimistic way, to say that I deny myself.
It's a weird mix of emotions and ambitions. Right now we're going to talk about the gentry, or the local gentry, or a gentry disposition, which is a stance that Biao advocates for and identifies with in the book. And it's on first reading, it struck me as a little bit strange. I mean, I'm a China scholar. Gentry, to most Western readers, will make them think of British country gentlemen who wear red coats and chase foxes and come back to the castle to drink champagne and yell at the servants. That's what we think the gentry are. For China scholars, gentry is something somewhat different. Gentry refers to the local elite who tried to pass the Confucian exams to become literati or mandarins or scholars, didn't get too far, maybe past the first level, or maybe not even that, but they wore the gown that gave them a certain status as being different from the ordinary people, and they occupied positions of authority in local society. And most of us, I think, would have thought that, would have seen them with a certain ambivalence, that yes, maybe they were benevolent figures, but maybe they were also part of the blood-sucking landlord elite that dominated traditional China. So at first glance, it was a strange thing to find in a how-to book for Chinese students in the 2010s and 2020s. So, Biao, I wonder if you could explain what that meant to you and how it fits in with this general thematic that we're developing here.
Yeah, thanks, David. Actually, this question is also a question asked by many Chinese readers. I mean, one obvious reason is that, Biao, don't you know we are now in 21st century? What they're talking about, the gentry. And I mean, I really brought up the issue of gentry in the interview, actually quite spontaneously. I was never really thought into carrying my card, I'm a gentry, no. And then that term or image came to my mind really as a embodiment of a certain style of thinking and a certain style of looking at the world. So therefore, it's kind of a disposition. And the starting point for me, the question for me is how each of us in today's world can build a meaningful world of our own. So I think today's world is really, in terms of how we give meaning to our own life, is really bipolarized. On one hand, we have become very kind of self-centered and self or family, and at the same time, probably we're worried about the global affairs and the survival of the planet. But we pay very little attention to our surroundings.
And we do this through Facebook, right?
Yeah.
That's how we relate to the globals.
In a very abstract way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We
And
like
all sudden
this,
come
we
back.
don't like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Full of opinions,
Yep.
full of very black. I mean, this is why things become so black and white, because if you pay attention to your concrete surrounding situations, I mean, you cannot make a black and white judgment. You're always more curious to see, how things work together or work against together, and how this linking mechanism are, and etc. So that is what I meant by this gentry mentality. You pay attention to your surrounding and try to find order of the surrounding. I mean, it's often implicit in the daily, very concrete interactions among people. And also gentry, in my imagination at least, they are observer, they are recorder, because they write local history and write about local society. But also they provide a certain normative reference as well, because they say, the local society ought to be like this, right? I mean, in the countryside, old days, I mean, gentries are very useful because they are teachers in the local school, and then they are kind of advisors for when peasants need to make a big decision. I mean, some people also do a bit of to predict the weather next year, whether or not be good, which kind of seeds should be, what kind of type of crop should be.
Not everyone will know this,
planted,
but in traditional Chinese government was very light. So the county magistrate, a county might have 250,000 people or more, he would not have any staff beyond what are called yamen runners, sort of proto-police, which would go out and beat people up if you wanted them to. And the smart local magistrate knew how little, and also you couldn't serve in your home place. It was an anti-corruption move.
Exactly.
So, and they moved a lot, another anti-corruption move. So every 3 years or so, your local magistrate would be replaced by another one. And if they were smart, they knew how little they knew. And they would call on the local gentry to decide local affairs. Because if they just decided on their own, 8 out of 10 times they'd decide wrongly because they didn't know. They might not speak the local dialect. They might not be able to communicate at all with local people. So the local gentry were the natural mediators between the state, as represented by the local magistrate, and the local population. And if they did it well, I mean, they have to be like local ethnographers and also political scientists to be able to understand the different dimensions of society versus power, how power wants to regulate society. So you're talking something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this goes back to our earlier conversation about my research, multi-layered processes of how small actions build up big system. A gentry must know this very well, because a gentry must know how the state systems, the very abstract, the bureaucratic system, the imperial system operates. At the same time, the gentry must know all this nitty-gritty, the empirical details of the village life. So therefore, they can speak to both and for both, right? And the gentry's business is not to make any judgment to say, the main business is not to make a judgment of the village life is going wrong, we should completely redesign it. The main business is to articulate the order. So, and then put things in a harmonious way. Of course, they have this conservative element in it, but their starting point is to understand the local life ecology and then to harmonize different elements. So this, for me, is a very charming, especially in today's world. So you create a meaningful world. Then sometimes I often use the word 自洽 is not is in some sense means self-contained, but is a kind of self-balancing world. You don't need to be too worried that we are marginal, worried about how I can be hooked up with the power center directly.
Right.
No need, because here is a universe in its own right. I have, spring, I have cherry blossom in autumn, I have grape will be harvested, and then we have local school. So then you will be kind of confident, have cultural confidence, even though you are marginal. I think that is really what is lacking now in China, probably also worldwide. People cannot create a self-balancing and self-contained cultural world.
No, I think it's very hard to do. It's either taken over by some state agency or it's left to a platform.
Yeah.
And it's extremely difficult to do that. Yeah. But as a research, how does this relate to research? It seems that, to me, it speaks to your willingness or your desire to have your own concerns in your research. That research is not just to, as you would say, splice Foucault for a 15th time and get to a new understanding of chapter 8 of Les mots et les choses or whatever, but to be engaged in something that really matters at some level to you and a community with which you identify.
Yeah. So that is the gentry idea approach. I mean, it means, first of all, it means a certain style method of doing research, right? And it's not, for example, a gentry is very different from a modern sociological service. They will not, gentry is not terribly interested in quantify everything and standardize everything, then create a chart, etc. I mean, they may do that if it's useful. For example, if they want to figure out the irrigation system, they may need to use some statistical model. But the whole idea is to find the meaning. The meaning of the local life, but this meaning is not derived from abstract principles. It must be emerge from things like how people get married, how you raise children, and how you mediate conflicts between neighbors over a missing cow, things like that. So that's this acute attention to details. But yet, at the same time, you don't stuck to the details, and you want to see how the details overlap
and come together.
Yeah, and create a kind of system, right? This is number one. Number two is that for the gentry, the purpose of knowledge is not to, because the gentry doesn't publish, or they don't have tenure.
Well, they might, but you don't have to do that to be
gentry, to the gentry, yeah. So they may write things as a hobby, it's just because they...
Or local gazetteers.
Yeah, that is
write
part
poetry,
of business.
they could do that.
Yeah,
right.
So that is quite, again, it's a very organic practice.
Right.
It's not under any pressure to do that. So their knowledge is really meant to feed back to practice, to communication. The main job of gentry, I mean, of course, gentry was denounced during the socialist revolution because they are not laboring people, right? And but now, they are doing lots of immaterial labor, which is a communication and the meaning making. And so they need to know all this in order to form a picture and then inform how, unfortunately, all gentry are men. That's true historically. And he communicate with villagers. So this, and again, related to my research activity in multiple ways. And one method, and also I'm thinking now to develop a type of research under the name of a communicative knowledge, right? You understand the society, but not to make like it's objective law of a society, then put in the library and waiting for future readers to come and find out and see, oh, a society is like that. No, the knowledge that we accumulate must be communicated back to the people. If there's no communication, I think the knowledge is dead, especially today. So for gentry, so the knowledge is meant to facilitate communication And the communication, of course, is to solve social problem, to regulate a social problem, to give meaning to people's behavior, which actually is what life is about. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me that in the past we have tended to interpret traditional Chinese society either through the lens of exploitation, that there were poor people who could do nothing, or through the lens of ritual, that everything was completely ritualized by Confucian doctrine. And both of those dismiss the fact that people had real rich lives over the centuries. Not to say they weren't exploited, not to say that ritual was unimportant, but that people could, the gentry could help to get beyond those constraints or those obstacles or those whatever, to arrive at a use of knowledge to help achieve harmony.
Oh, yeah,
Sounds
absolutely,
like
yeah.
a silly Confucian idea, but I think harmony is kind of a nice thing. There are worse goals than harmony. Of course, if someone tells you to sit down and be harmonious, that's not harmony, that's authority, right? But your vision of the gentry is as local players who are invested and who know more than most other people. They have knowledge that local society does not have, and they can use that for the purposes of bettering local society, solving problems, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm not defending the class position of the gentry, right? But as a method, as a way of knowing, and then the purpose of knowing, I think it's a quite attractive historical figure for me. I mean, as you know, many people explain why China had a rural revolution since the 1930s is because the loss of gentry.
Right.
And the Kaiming Shisheng, the relatively progressive, this locally embedded, benevolent gentries were replaced by exploitative, we call it 劣生, this kind of evil bullies, who actually more at that time these bullies representing the interest of state and become predatory over the local society rather than the earlier one, who's mainly grounded in the local village, even though they mediate between the system and the community. Yeah.
So to sum up this little passage, it's another view on what agency means, another view on what the purpose of knowledge is, which is not knowledge for its own sake, but to be applied to particular activities, particular problems, to arrive at solutions that involve more than just the original knowledge problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so therefore the communication and the mobilizing is very important. You communicate.
Mobilizing and communicating, exactly. The topic we'll talk about next is Beijing University, usually known as Beida, which is a topic Biao addresses in part because he graduated from Beida. Wu Qi, the journalist with whom he worked to produce the book, is also a product of Beida. I don't know if the editor, no, she's not. Okay, that's why she's not in the book. I mean, Beida, for those of us who work on China, we know that Beida is a very prestigious place, the rough equivalent of Harvard. I went to Harvard, but as a graduate student. We have no panache at all, graduate students at Harvard, but undergraduates at Harvard are known for many things, and yes, exactly. So I remember at one place in your book, you were talking with a professor or another student, I think, and he or she said to you, perhaps being at Beida means never having to be afraid of anything, or something like that. So from a Western point of view, though, for people who don't study China or don't really know anything about Beijing University, except that it's a university in Beijing, I think their first thoughts will be, how can education in China be good? I mean, we always think there's a communist society, that everything in the educational system must be about communism. How could you have freedom or ideas or learn things? It's a very simplistic view, but it's a view you run across a lot. And you don't have to do much to rebut that kind of view. But just speak to what Beida means in the Chinese context, what it symbolizes, what it meant to you in your life.
Well, Beida is, of course, as an institution, is historically very important. It is a place that started the May 4th movement in 1919, which is the beginning of modern China in a way. And then, before the Communist Party was formed, And the Beida, it was the first place to have, it was a place that had the first communist group, in the reading group. I mean, because of people like Li Dazhao was there. Chairman Mao was a librarian in Beida. Yeah. So people like Chen Duxiu and so it's immediately related to the Communist Party even. And then Beida was also the place that started the Cultural Revolution in 1966. Yeah, the first so-called big character post was appeared in Beida, and Mao responded it, and then started the movement known as the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. Then again, Beida was a place, it started as the April 5th movement that ended the Cultural Revolution after the death of Zhou Enlai. Again, 1989, actually throughout the 1980s, Beida was the center of all kinds of cultural debates. So Beida has this kind of a tradition of radical thinking, and the students went to Beida even today did not regard themselves only as university students. They think they are going to a place which is so tightly to the fate of the nation. So it is a kind of life-changing, not in terms of careers, not in career advancement sense, but you're transformed to entirely different figure. You are into history, therefore you are you're going to future. Have all this kind of, and not too difficult to imagine, given the history and given you're a teenager, 18 or 19, you welcome that kind of ideals, and also teacher give you that kind of impressions too. I wanted to, so that is what the Beida meant to China. Probably is quite unique worldwide. I can't imagine any other university that are tied to the fate of nations so closely. I mean, yeah, that's a fascinating topic. Again, it's not just what university means today. Huh? So I think Beida will be interesting case. It's about knowledge, but about movement, politics, and how
Harvard is not about the nation.
Exactly. It's more about elite self.
It's about that.
Production, right? And and also it's very different from Oxford, where I worked and studied for 20 years. I mean, Oxford is very closely related to British politics since the imperial time, but not as much as like what Beida did, because Beida, changed the China's history. Anyway, so that's yes, this is, I mean, like thinking of the British history, there's always such a thing as a very relatively stable social force or class. Then Oxford actually represent or articulate the pursuit of the ruling class, therefore they influence government. But China, throughout the 20th century, there's never a stable social force. No national bourgeois, no working class. The peasants were also politically too weak, even though it's demographically very large. So therefore, certain institutions could become very important.
Symbolically.
Yeah, symbolically. And then precisely because there's no stable structure into pushing for certain political change.
I was struck by, how when you were there, you were completely free, or almost completely free. I can't imagine that anywhere in the world. And I think it would be a real surprise. It was a surprise to me, and I know a fair bit about China. If someone's reading this who's never heard about China, I could not have gotten away with what you did as an undergraduate. Tell them what your experience was.
What I did in the undergraduate, I went to 1999. I finished my high school, and I went to the Shijiazhuang People's Liberation
this was not the free part. This
Academy, for 1 year, and for military training. And after that, I went to Beida. And the first year, I was a good student. I went to all the classes, and then I found, but that's true, in terms of the content of teaching, it was far from being satisfactory. So it was very boring, and education is still quite weak in China, must I say. And but that's very free in terms of what you not in terms of what the professor can teach, but it's very free in terms of what the students can do.
Right, right, right.
So that is a very interesting ecosystem. And the professors also somehow knew that. They say, okay, you are the brightest kids from China according to this certain exam system. And we know that we are not really satisfy all your need. Feel free to do, what you like doing.
That's really admirable that teachers realize we're stuck teaching this curriculum
Yeah.
with textbooks that perhaps are not very good.
Yeah, so they
And
don't
this
demand
This is to
us-
your detriment. Go do something else.
Yeah.
And that's hardly imaginable. I can't, in Paris, I can't imagine this happening in Paris or anywhere else for that matter.
Yeah, so I'm
Maybe
glad
it has,
that
but-
I had that experience. I mean, we had the class. I mean, there is also a policy to say, if there's less than 3 students turn up to a class, the class should be cancelled. And some
That's an
professors
incentive to organize.
There's a professor quite happy to
Oh, they were happy too. I
to
see.
cancel.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, happy. I mean, they accept the fact. Yeah. So probably they feel a little hurt too. But anyway, so I went, and the first year, well, I thought, oh my God, it's so boring. And another thing, it's all kind of dead words. It just all the text does not say what's going on. So I'm going to do something else. So I spent the remaining 3 years of my undergraduate mainly in this community in Beijing, actually far, far away from Beijing University campus, the Zhejiangcun, the migrant
It was downtown,
community.
right? And Zhejiangcun was where?
It was in
Beijing?
south Beijing,
Okay.
south suburb Beijing, and Beijing
So a
University.
long bus ride.
Oh yeah, more than 2 hours one way. So I did that then, but it's also remarkable. Somehow that type of my behavior was not only accepted, but it was really endorsed and praised.
Encouraged, right?
Yeah, encouraged. Teachers say, "Oh, well done." You as an undergraduate, you can just go and find your way to enter community and did this long-term field research. And I carried on with my when I was doing masters there. And at the same time, I also went to South China, the Pearl River Delta, to with a team to do research on migrant workers in the Pearl River Delta, because I want to compare how the people there, the factory workers in South China, different from my case in Beijing, where self-employed, working in family workshops.
And how could you finance something like that? Did
yeah.
Beida give you the money?
No, well, so the Zhejiangcun was in the beginning was self-financed, and then my teacher, Professor Wang Hangsheng, who passed away a few years ago tragically, she helped me. And the fun part was that, like the South China, I probably will have 6 or 7 students from different departments went there together. We just wrote a letter to the mayor in Dongguan City to say, we are from Beida, we're interested in this, and we wanted to investigate. We
And
hope
they
your
hosted you?
support. And they just cover all the cost.
Okay, they just
Yeah.
opened their guest house to Jiaodai Suo.
Yeah, and then food and or even the transport.
Now, here's the power of Beida, right?
Oh, yeah, that
if you
bit
had
of-
been at
there's a
some
little
lesser
privilege.
university, this would not have, they wouldn't even have answered the letter, right? Yeah,
So that was the kind of the privilege probably we didn't abuse, but that's true. We have to realize that. So the freedom is that also explain my kind of dilemma here now. And on one hand, we had this kind of exposure to the field situation, at least. Probably it's not 100% the reality. We went there relatively early stage, so I know how to talk to people and do field research. But we did not, I did not receive good systematic training in theories, etc.
Right,
I still
right.
feel very weak, very inadequate in this regard. Yeah, but it's quite unique. I mean, I must say now the situation is different.
I was
It's
going to
less
ask,
free.
was Wu Qi's experience at Beida like that he did whatever you wanted to? Would students at Beida now be able to say, hey, I found the newest happening thing
Yeah.
out in, I don't know, whatever distant suburb. Can I just go write it up and send it in 2 or 3 years and you'll say, very well done? I mean, is that possible now?
Much less likely. I
Okay.
think much more difficult because everything is so, properly structured.
Systematized,
Yeah.
right.
So it's related to professionalization,
Right,
and all
right,
the
right.
curriculum needed to be approved, and so then you have credit. I don't know whether they have now also adopted a credit system. You have to accumulate
Surely,
that
but I have no
credit.
idea.
Yeah.
But so you sort of benefited from that spirit of the 1980s, that they let you do this, right? This openness, this possibility. I don't know. Do you see it like that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I benefited from the 1980s. Actually, I benefited from the 1990 confusion. At that time,
The confusion. Okay.
the confusion, after 1989, the
Okay.
intellectual community, was shocked to its
Right.
core.
Right.
And
Oh, it was sort of a paralysis.
yeah,
that-
so there's
so they just let you go.
yeah, there's a very
I
little
see.
happen, and also the state does not know how to handle. I mean, they just want the order,
Right, right,
stability, and then you have this vacuum. So the old cultural fever, this kind of highbrow ideas went away,
Right.
and then there's no other things there. So therefore, I benefited from that condition, vacuum, at least in two senses. Number one, then I was quite free to go to reality to find out what's going on rather than being captured by big ideas.
Right.
And then number two, just practically, it's a kind of anarchy situation. The highly stable
Highly
anarchy.
stable anarchy.
Yeah.
Oh, there's another chapter in your
yeah.
book where you talk about universities should encourage the exception or exceptionalism. That's kind of what you're talking about, right? That now Chinese universities have become like universities everywhere else, where you have to take 4 courses a term and get 12 credits, and they add up your credits at the end, and they check boxes all along.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to be something exceptional. But
Very.
at the time, you were lucky enough and smart enough to take advantage of it in such a way that launched your career in a certain direction.
Yeah, I think this touches on a quite deep question, which is a global question. The elite formation, the mechanism of elite formation. I can see with my own eyes how people like Beida became much more powerful now, and of course much wealthier. They have all this the money, and the research money is not an issue at all. I mean, this is very enviable
Yes.
from a European perspective.
American too.
Yeah, and then, so it looks all good, but the problem, I can see how they became part of the mainstream
Right.
through kind of interlocking mechanisms among elites in different sectors of society. More and more officials come to Beida to earn degrees because they wanted to have a kind of Beida
cachet of,
masters.
right,
yeah.
yeah.
And then you have more classes in Beida catering for entrepreneurs, MBA or MPA, that kind of thing. And then they really encourage the circulation or overlapping between cultural elite, political elite, and the commercial elite. I understand this is exactly what elite universities in the US do, probably set as a model. You have the rotating doors between, all these kind of elite chambers of the same building that people walk through from Wall Street to Washington to
It's
top
very hard for an
universities.
institution to resist this.
Yeah,
Because
I
once
can
you get
see.
in there, you
Very
get, you
comfortable.
get money and power. It's
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah.
There's security.
Yeah.
So in some ways, to sum this little topic up, maybe the evolution of the symbol of Beida, which is no longer a symbol of radicalism or distance from our symbol of criticism, or just a little bit of distance from power, sort of symbolizes the way China is, I mean, one of the, not a downside of what China has done over reform and opening, but a point of concern.
For
this
me-
capture
for
by
me-
the forces of money and the forces of power.
Yeah. So for me, definitely. But the one very sad twist is that is part of global trend.
Yeah.
It is by doing that, actually, China is integrating itself to the global system, or actually is partly because of global pressure that the Beida is being incorporated into the power system. And why is that global university ranking? They look at how university in the West operates, and they think that is the way they should go for. And traditionally, it was not like that, right? University, I mean, you set up a university in different provinces, and in order for them to solve local problems.
Right.
Nobody, I mean, university like in Wuhan or in Guangzhou are very interested in local problem. Everyone is want to talk about national, global projects.
Right.
And of course, then there's no real innovation when you're all doing the same type of project using same framework. But the real innovation comes from the local condition. So that is something I very much hope that we can do something to shake up this type of hierarchy. On one hand, we say, the economy is really decentralized and the world is very divided, but the institutional power of university is really reinforcing certain type of hierarchy. And
so I would say what we need is gentry universities, right?
Yeah, gentry university, all we can use combined with latest technology. Why don't we turn university into platforms instead of these institutions? It's about the knowledge. University, the idea of university is to share knowledge. It's a kind of you can say it's a nuclear reactor of knowledge. You bring knowledge together and see how the chemistry, right? And then you share it. No, now is mainly it's kind of also become a laundry machine through which the financial capital is washed and
converted into cultural capital.
So therefore, and to legitimate certain group of people who are the rulers. This is a global problem, and I hope so it is very valuable to recall the youth experiences.
A manifesto here. Yes. Yeah. At the moment, I want to turn to something a little bit different. One of the strongest chapters in the book, I thought, was the one titled Centers and Margins, or Centers and Peripheries, which I thought was, I don't know, it just struck me as very well written and very interesting. And I would say that one of the major themes in Western China watching is the power of Chinese central authorities and the Communist Party. And I just wonder how you would explain to us how Chinese people feel and deal with the power of the center, the power, the draw of the center, and what that means to Chinese life and Chinese thinking.
So first of all, I'm interested in the question of relation between center and the periphery for two reasons. Number one, as we mentioned earlier, I just feel there's a need for Chinese people to develop the capacity to construct a meaningful local universe where they are living, instead of just look up to the center and always feel themselves being inferior.
To the shining sun in Beijing.
Exactly, right? And inadequate. So the self is always negative, so the good things are always in Beijing, which is a reality to a great extent. This is number one. Number two concern is that about global geopolitics. And I just feel that the power elite in China, as well as many ordinary people, are very fixated on the project of taking over the US, become a new center. I mean, that is in a way legitimate, but I just feel that is not a very interesting and is not a very beneficial for the world, not a very desirable way of thinking. Why don't we think in a entirely different architecture of the world altogether, instead of keep the architecture intact, but just replace.
Change the head.
Yeah, change the head. And we know that can be disastrous once you think of that way, because everything is reduced to raw power struggle, rather than a systemic change, right? So then I think center and the question of center and periphery is important. And how do Chinese people think of center? This is a complex question, and just put it in a very brief the way, I think I'm worried about the tendency that many people are really what I call the center-centric way of making sense of life. That has, have a deep roots in the tradition, because as you say, 逐鹿中原, the battlefield of the central plain is always the very important the strategic thinking in the political leaders, because who capture the center, who capture China. And also culturally, there is a clear center, traditionally the Confucius doctrine. But then what is different now as compared to before is that previously that kind of the emphasis on center is kind of civilizational or cultural. But in terms of material life, everyone, the local people think, okay, they have their own universe, and then there is a central civilization model, and which they follow. So one metaphor I use in the book is that the moon is reflected in thousands of lakes.
Right.
Everyone has their own lake. I mean, every place has the same lake, but there's one moon. I mean, that's the Confucius ideals. But there's a moon where all can be found in every lake. So every lake can organize themselves according to the same moon. But
So it's
every
the reflection, but
yes,
it's a local reflection.
exactly.
Right.
And then every place has its own order, right? But now in the modern time, it's very different because there's one moon, and the moon is no longer reflecting in lakes. People want to go to the moon directly, physically, to stay there. So this explains why Beijing and Shanghai become such a big cities, a massive migration, and the negligence.
And extremely competitive.
Yeah, extremely, because it becomes so competitive, not because there's so many people in China, but more important than the large number of people is because the criteria of judging what is success, what is good life, is so narrow.
The big cities are ambition magnets.
Yeah.
Right.
So for everyone. So of
everyone,
course, by definition, it become very competitive. If Chinese population was half of what it is now, it will still be very competitive if many people follow the same path, right?
It's not just population pressure.
Yeah.
It's this urge to be at the center of things.
Exactly. And the center, of course, by definition, there's only one center,
right?
So it cannot be alternative path. So that is why we discuss. I mean, whether or not the older model, how I mean, is can give us some kind of the lesson to follow. You everyone have their own ecosystem, but we kind of share certain cultural understanding, and therefore you still have the national coherence, but without a really kind of one center everyone have to rush to. Then globally, whether or not also we can think of different world system. Yeah, so this is why we discuss center and periphery.
A final question. I'm going to ask Biao to allow him to let his imagination run free. It occurred to me to try to imagine if the how-to lessons you tried to impart in your book, if this way of thinking through self and as a local gentry member, through society as well, and then in this global world, if Chinese people or people anywhere, because presumably Americans and Europeans will read this book once it's translated, what would a world look like if the wisdom you were imparting actually bore fruit and had an impact on the world?
Great, David. So probably this is the moment that we can revisit the title.
There we go.
Self as a method a bit. What does it mean exactly? Self method means you don't take a self as a subject. So it's not your belly watching, think of the self all the time as your main concern. Self as a method means actually the subject matter is something else. What is subject matter is your surrounding and the world. Then why self as a method is because you cannot understanding your surrounding and the world in a concrete way unless you start with something you are most familiar with, and that something concerns you in a most immediate way. And that is a self. So self as a method is different from just have self-awareness or
individualism.
No, almost the opposite, but without denying the importance of self.
Right, so it's not selflessness, you're not denouncing self, you're not living in a convent, you're not doing any of those things.
Yeah,
Right.
but turning the self into a method to understand
right.
the world. So you are really worried and interested in the world, but also you're interested in yourself. But opening up, thinking, this also means that the self is not given, self is not stable, and the self is not, certainly yourself is not the starting point of the world. If you are not here, you were not born, the world is still like this, right? It's a kind of contingent and yourself is constantly changing. Pay attention to all this. And so you'll see yourself as a kind of a vase, a bottle that many things are going through, and then follow the things to the larger surrounding to see how the world come into being. So that is what what we mean by self as a method. Then what I personally hope young people do is probably three things. One is that, unpack the self, and so no need to feel self-pity, no need to feel that you are suffering, you are a victim, and that actually is a quite commonly shared sentiment among young people, I suppose globally, you are not suffering much. I mean, materially, our living condition is much better than before. Just we have very concrete evidence to show that, and we have less military conflicts now than 200 years ago, and the technology, etc. So we have to put things in perspective, and then the sense of we are suppressed, we are not doing what we really want to do is conditioned by complex situation. Why don't we think through what is the condition that create the current situation we are not really unhappy about? Instead of just to victimize yourself, you open it up. Number one. Number two is that pay attention to our surroundings. This is why I'm also promoting this notion, the nearby, working with artists and activists. The nearby is not really a community, but just very different type of people you come across every day, but you don't pay much attention. The delivery workers, the people who clean the courtyard in your condominium, and the security guard, as well as your teachers, your colleagues.
Your camera crew?
Yes. And think through about their life history, how different they are, then think why they are coming together, and in what way they come together. When they come together, what is the tangible relation between them? Is it just market transaction, or the something else, and what creates a condition? Think of that through. So that kind of nearby is interesting because it's you are the center of the nearby, so you can observe, and then it is not really strictly programmed. It's not a one unit, right? The nearby, everyone's nearby is different, and every day's nearby is slightly different. But think through, you can see the dynamics, the grammar of a social formation. Thirdly, I think should also go beyond the nearby. Travel and observe and think far beyond your immediate context. I mean, this probably is particularly relevant to Chinese youth. Pay attention. Sorry, actually now probably more relevant to youth in other countries. Pay more attention to the world. So I must say that Japan would be a very typical example. If you compare today's situation to the 1980s, we see a kind of renationalization of the mind, or the closure again. Young people are losing interest in diversity. Yeah, so because they feel it's so uncertain, and the life already is quite precarious, they just wanted to have some security in the home place. So the statistics show that, yes, students exchange and travel the declining in Japan and possibly in US as well, but China is still going on. That's a good sign. But you go different places and pay attention to the nearby there, and put yourself into shoes of the local people and see the world from their view. And that's extremely important because currently China is rising rapidly. And then people mainly focus on the question, okay, what does this rise of China means for Chinese people, okay, and for US. And very few people really thinking through what does this rise mean for a particular tribe in Africa,
Right.
to a particular community in Latin America, right? So why don't you, I mean, this actually is a privilege for Chinese youth because we are in a position really, in the middle of a very dynamic historical change. If we can go to these communities and observe how they think of the rise of China, that will be another way to establish tangible and a meaningful relation to the world.